Picture this. You've just settled into your favorite chair after a long day, maybe with a cup of tea or coffee in hand, and you realize the house feels quieter than it used to. The kids are grown, the grandkids are busy with their own lives, and that bustling energy you once thrived on seems to have faded into the background. Retirement was supposed to be this golden chapter, time to relax, to finally do what you love. But instead, there's this nagging feeling creeping in, loneliness. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. I've talked to so many folks just like you, and they felt that same quiet ache. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to stay that way. There are real people out there, seniors just like you, who've turned that loneliness into something beautiful, into joy, purpose, and connection. And that's what we're going to explore together today. Overcoming loneliness in retirement through their stories. These aren't just feel-good tales. They're honest, heartfelt journeys from people who've been where you are and found a way to shine again. Let's start with Margaret. She's 68, a retired nurse from Ohio. And when she hung up her scrubs for the last time, she thought she'd be thrilled. For years, she dreamed of sleeping in, gardening, maybe even picking up a paintbrush again. But a few months in, reality hit hard. Her husband had passed a couple of years earlier, and without the daily rhythm of work, those chats with colleagues, the patients who'd become like family, she felt lost. The days just stretched out, she told me. I'd wake up, water the plants, and then wonder what to do with the next 12 hours. She tried filling the time with TV, but that only made her feel more disconnected. One day, she caught herself staring out the window, watching neighbors walk by, and realized she hadn't spoken to another soul in 3 days. That was her wake-up call. Margaret decided she wasn't going to let loneliness win. She started small, really small. She'd always loved flowers, so she joined a local garden club she'd seen advertised at the library. At first, she just listened, sipping coffee in the back. But soon enough, someone asked her opinion on pruning roses. That little question pulled her in. Now she's not just tending her own garden. She's helping design a community plot, teaching younger members about soil, and laughing over shared stories of stubborn weeds. It's not just about the flowers, she said. It's about feeling like I'm part of something again. Margaret's story shows us that purpose doesn't have to be grand. It can start with something you already love, something that gets you out the door and talking to people who get you. Then there's James, 72, from a small town in Texas. James was the kind of guy who'd always been surrounded by people. Decades as a high school football coach will do that. Retirement hit him like a freight train. No more practices, no more pep talks, no more kids shouting, "Coach," across the field. His wife was still working part-time, and his buddies were either busy with grandkids or had moved away. I felt like I'd been benched, he said, like the game was going on without me. He tried fishing, something he'd loved as a kid, but sitting alone by the lake just made the silence louder. One evening, flipping through channels, he stumbled on a documentary about veterans, something that clicked because he'd served in the Army years back. That sparked an idea. He looked up a local veterans group online and showed up to their next meeting, half expecting to feel out of place. Instead, he found guys his age, swapping stories about boot camp and bad coffee. And before he knew it, he was volunteering to help organize their monthly breakfasts. It's funny, he told me. I went in looking for company and came out with a crew. James didn't just find people to talk to. He found a way to use what he'd always been good at, bringing folks together. His days have purpose now, and that loneliness, it's faded into the background, drowned out by the clatter of pancake plates and old war stories. What Margaret and James have in common is they didn't wait for connection to find them. They took a step, even a shaky one, toward it. Maybe you're thinking, That's great for them. But where do I even start? It doesn't have to be complicated. Think about what's always lit you up, even a little. Cooking, music, fixing things, and look for a way to share it. A neighbor might need a hand, or there's a group out there waiting for someone just like you to walk through the door. And if that feels daunting, that's okay. We're going to meet more folks who've been there, like Helen, who turned her love for knitting into a lifeline she never expected. Her story's coming up next, and it's a beautiful reminder that loneliness doesn't get the final say, you do. So, we've been talking about how Margaret found her spark in a garden club, and James rediscovered his knack for bringing people together through a veterans group. Their stories show us that loneliness doesn't have to be a permanent guest in retirement. It's something you can nudge out the door with a little effort and a lot of heart. Now, let's sit down with Helen, a 74-year-old from Oregon, who turned a quiet hobby into a lifeline she never saw coming. Helen's someone you'd probably love to have a cup of tea with, soft-spoken, with a laugh that sneaks up on you. But after her husband passed and her kids moved across the country, she found herself rattling around a house that felt too big and too empty. I'd always been busy, she told me, raising 3 kids, working as a librarian. It was nonstop. Then suddenly, it was just me and the cat wasn't much for conversation. She'd knit for years, scarves for the kids, blankets for the grandbabies, but it was just something to keep her hands busy. Until one winter, when the silence got too heavy, she decided to do something with all those skeins of yarn piling up. She'd heard about a charity that collected handmade blankets for families in need, and on a whim, she mailed off a few. A week later, she got a letter back. Not just a thank you, but an invitation to join their local chapter. I almost didn't go, she admitted. I thought, what if they're all younger? What if I don't fit in? But she went anyway, and what she found was a room full of people, some her age, some not, chatting over needles and coffee, swapping patterns and stories. Now, Helen's blankets warm more than just bodies. They've wrapped her into a circle of friends who check in on her, share her quiet days, and make her feel needed again. It's not about the knitting, she said. It's about knowing someone's waiting for me to show up. Helen's story flows right into Carlos, 69, from Arizona, who found his way out of loneliness through a completely different door. Carlos retired from a factory job he'd had for 35 years. And at first, he loved the freedom. No more 5 a.m. alarms. No more assembly line grind. But after a few months, the days started blending together. His wife was still teaching, and his old work buddies had scattered. I'd sit on the porch with my coffee, he said, and realize I hadn't talked to anyone but the mailman all week. He missed the chatter, the camaraderie, but he didn't know how to get it back. Then one day, flipping through a local paper, he saw an ad for a community center looking for volunteers to teach basic skills: carpentry, cooking, even car repair. Carlos had always been handy, fixing things around the house, so he figured, why not? He showed up, a little nervous, and offered to teach a woodworking class. The first session was small, just a handful of folks, mostly younger retirees like him. But they were eager, asking questions, laughing at his stories about botched DIY projects. Word spread, and soon he had a full group, sawdust flying, and conversations buzzing. I didn't realize how much I missed teaching someone something, he said. It's like I got a piece of myself back. Carlos didn't just fill his days. He built a little community, one hammer swing at a time. What's beautiful about his journey is how it started with something he already knew, something he didn't have to overthink, just a willingness to share it. Both Helen and Carlos stumbled into connection almost by accident. But that's the thing. It doesn't take a grand plan. It's about taking what's already in you, whether it's knitting, fixing things, or just a good story and letting it ripple out. Maybe you're not into crafts or tools, and that's fine. It could be as simple as joining a book club at the library or offering to water a neighbor's plants while they're away. The point is, you've got something to give, even if it feels small right now. And sometimes, that small step leads you to people who've been waiting for someone like you without even knowing it. Speaking of which, there's one more story I can't wait to share. Edna's. She took loneliness by the horns in a way that'll make you smile. And it's all about finding joy in the unexpected. We've been walking alongside some incredible folks. Margaret with her garden, James and Nod 32, his veterans, Helen with her knitting, and Carlos with his woodworking. Each of them found a way to push loneliness aside by reaching out with something they already had inside them. Now, let's meet Edna, an 81-year-old from Florida who will make you rethink what it means to shake things up in retirement. Edna's a firecracker. Imagine a woman with bright red glasses and a laugh that fills the room. After her husband of 50 years passed, she moved into a senior living community, thinking it'd be a fresh start. But instead of the bustling social life she'd hoped for, she found herself surrounded by closed doors and quiet hallways. Everyone seemed to keep to themselves, she told me. I'd wave in the dining room, and half the time, I'd get a nod and that was it. She tried bingo nights, but the spark just wasn't there. One day, feeling fed up, she noticed a dusty old piano in the common room. Edna hadn't played since she was a kid, but she sat down anyway, plunking out a shaky "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." A few people peeked in, curious, and one lady, Ruth, joked, "You taking requests yet?" That got Edna thinking. She started practicing, digging up old sheet music from her apartment, and within a month, she was playing hymns and show tunes every afternoon. Word got around, and soon, folks were dragging chairs over, singing along, tapping their feet. "I'm no maestro," she laughed, "but you'd think I was Elvis the way they clap." What started as a whim turned into a daily gathering. People bringing cookies, sharing stories between songs, even requesting "Sweet Caroline" so often she's got it memorized. Edna didn't just find company. She created a little family, one off-key note at a time. "Loneliness can't stand up to a good chorus," she said, and I think she's onto something. What's so special about Edna and all these stories is how they remind us that joy and purpose aren't out of reach, no matter how quiet life gets. Margaret dug into her garden. James rallied his veterans. Helen stitched her way to friends. Carlos built a workshop crew, and Edna played her heart out. They didn't wait for someone to knock on their door. They opened it themselves, even just a crack, and let life spill in. You don't need to be a social butterfly or have a big plan. Maybe it's chatting with the cashier at the grocery store a little longer, or signing up for that class you've been eyeing. It's about those small, brave steps that say, "I'm still here, and I've got something to share." And the best part? You're not starting from scratch. You've got a lifetime of experiences, quirks, and passions to draw from. That's your secret weapon against loneliness. Looking back at these journeys, it's clear that connection doesn't have to be complicated. A flower, a hammer, a needle, a piano key. Simple things turned into lifelines because these folks gave them a chance. If you're feeling that ache, that quiet that's a little too loud, take a page from their book. Start where you stand, with what you love, and see where it takes you. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what's helped you feel connected, or maybe what you're thinking about trying. If these stories spark something for you, give this video a thumbs up. It lets me know you're out there, and it helps others find this too. And hey, hit that subscribe button if you want more real talk like this. We're in this together, after all. Here's to finding your own joy, your own people, and living your fullest life, no matter the years. You've got this.